There are 4 wooden Harrison clocks in the Science Museum, and 3 are in a special display by the Clockmakers Company. The 4th is on the ground floor in an obscure location. The complete long case clock with its case is signed by James Harrison, who was John Harrison's brother, but parts of the clock have actually been signed by John Harrison, including the equation of timetable on the front door. This clock was kept in John Harrison's cottage and had all the features of a regulator clock, including temperature compensated gridiron pendulum, adjustable cycloidal cheeks and maintaining power, and he used the neighbour's chimney to aid his star observations to get accurate time calculation. The clock on the floor was John Harrison's first clock, made when he was 20 years old, and signed John Harrison 1713 in ink on the calendar wheel. It has an anchor escapement and not all of the features of his later accurate timekeeping clocks. This movement is a much altered one that was rebuilt in the style of the 1728 Harrison long case movements in 1970. The escapement, pendulum, count wheel, hammer and bell were all replaced, but the framework and the wheelwork are original, and it was signed James Harrison. There are other wooden Harrison clocks, one in the Nostell Priory and one in Leeds Museum. About 2 years ago I became interested with the idea of making John Harrison's wooden clock, and there's very little information I could find out about it. I went to the Science Museum in London, and there are 5 examples there, 3 in the Clockmakers collection upstairs and 1 downstairs in the ground floor. They're very unattractive, uninteresting looking clocks because they're dirty, couldn't really be cleaned because they're just wood. And the wood is darkened with age, so they don't look terribly exciting, but they were a big development in the history of clocks. They were accurate to within a second a month on the regulator version that he made at the end in about 1727. That's 300 years ago. Amazing thought that could be done with wood. He was a carpenter, worked with wood his life and trained, so he knew about wood and the best way to use it. As a matter of sheer coincidence, I happen to be one of the very few people who've obtained A-level in woodwork, which actually turned out to be quite a useful thing to have. Gives me an appreciation for wood, but without necessarily being an expert. The benefit of the way in which he constructed the clocks was that they didn't need oiling, because all of the bearings and the pinions are made out of lignum vitae. The lignum vitae he used was readily available in those days, but now with CITES there is a problem in getting hold of it and being able to use it. but luckily you can get hold of old bowling balls for crown green bowling, which is what this slices that I've taken out of a bowling ball. You can see the marks at the edge there. So there's about that sort of size. And one bowling ball will just nicely make a complete set of bearings and so on for the clock. The main framework of the clock is in oak, as you can see here, and then inset, where the lighter colour is, I haven't yet finished that, that's also in oak, and that's removable. There are no pillars in between the clock like there are on normal clocks. They're just these latches which secure the plates into position, which are in recesses top and bottom in the frame, and the same at the back. The one thing that I had a big problem with was getting hold of any information. I couldn't find any drawings, and it was, other than going to the British Museum, I could take photographs and a bit of video, and I made as many inquiries as I could have from various sources, and finally someone pointed me towards John Harrison's Contrivance, which was a book that was published by Stuart Harrison, no relation, and this is a highly technical review of, or detail of, the regulator clock, the last clock that Harrison devised. And it is a kind of laboratory regulator clock made in brass, but with grasshopper escapement, which was his special feature of the clocks. And this book unfortunately is no longer in print, and very, very limited number of them must have been printed, and they're just not available, except that I managed to find on Google Books a download which enabled me to print out the complete book. And I'd been told that at the very end there was a little information about his previous wooden clocks, and this is the only detailed information about them that I could find anywhere. They're not particularly scale drawings, although it says scale 1 to 4, but there's some useful things, and in particular over the page here are the wheel counts from the 1728 clock. It gives the pitch between wheels, it gives the diameters of the wheels, but of course the wheels have to all fit together in a particular order, which you can see here, and as I discovered, it is quite tricky to get everything to fit in correctly, because you have to end up with the main shaft here that takes the hour and minute indicators, has to be right in the centre. So this is the going side, and that's the main one where you wind up the going wheel, going train. This is the second shaft, and off that is the second wheel. Those two wheels mate together, and then there's another pair of wheels that mate back onto here, which give you minutes and hours, and then there's another wheel that comes down here that gives you the date. And on this side of the clock, which I haven't shown, haven't got in yet, is the strike mechanism. But what I have done, if you can just see very faint lines around here, there are, I've just sketched out where the various centres of the wheels should occur. And rather pleasingly, as I put this together and depthed everything, they came to exactly where they should do, and the wheels mated nicely. The one thing about roller pinions, which he uses, and the rounded form of teeth, is that they're fairly tolerant of not particularly accurately machined surfaces. There was a little detail in the book here which went into the forms of teeth, the same exactly here as were in the final regulator clock, and there's some quite useful theoretical information about them. So it's worth downloading the book, especially as it's freely available. It's a major undertaking to make the final regulator clock. It's much more complex than the wooden clocks, but on the other hand, highly accurate. And there is some extra information here about the pallets, and the pallets, he says in the book here, were made from snakewood. Well, snakewood was a very obscure wood that was only available from limited sources, and it was used for musical instruments, that sort of thing. I did manage to get hold of some, and I found it very brittle and springy, so I didn't feel inclined to use it on this. I made mine with one of the inferior forms of lignum vitae, which is not quite as heavy as this. Perhaps might do my party piece now and show how well this floats in water. True lignum vitae is denser than water, so if you put it, doesn't float, and I think that will be a bit of a surprise to people. You can get a wood that sinks. I think there aren't any others that are denser than water. Now the other material that these clocks are made from is the oak, which is used in the main frame. Now, in his day, it would have definitely been English oak quarter sawn, and that is a piece of quarter sawn English oak, and you can just about make out the medullary rays. They're not that visible on here, but just about. And quarter sawn means that it's sawn radiating out from the centre. This is just on the edge of being quarter sawn. Move that away a bit so you can see it. So that goes in that direction towards the centre. Now the one thing that I found is that these English sawn oak tends to be not straight grained. It's got knots in it, like this here. The grain is very wavy, so it's difficult to make anything from, and it's very difficult to get hold of. We've long since stopped using oak for many things, and almost exclusively American oak is used, and this is a piece of American oak which is readily available, and this has been cut for 2 years, I suppose, and if you can see down the length of it, it is absolutely straight as a die. It's not bent or moved at all. It's absolutely totally straight grained, and you can see that there is the grain of the wood, so it's absolutely straight, no knots, really good wood for making things from, and planes and machines nicely. It's slightly coarser perhaps than English oak, and it hasn't got as much figuring, or the medullary rays aren't so noticeable You can see them there on this section here. Now luckily you can get thinner veneer slices separately available, and you can also get plywood made of oak. This is the plywood that I got. It's 6mm, it's 3 ply, and it's all solid oak, and it stays nice and flat. That's been cut for 2 years and it doesn't have any warping in it, so it's a good thing to make anything that's flat, like gears, and very pleased with that. If you want thicker wheels, you can glue two bits together, and you can also make the gears and then face it with oak separately with a piece of thin veneer, which you can also buy. And you can buy different thicknesses of veneer, nice and straight grained. And the other thing you can get is slightly thicker. This is 3mm, and I use that for the gear teeth here. And the whole point of this is that the gears have to have end grain on them, so that if they were made this way round, they'd just snap. If they're made this way round, they've got the strength of the grain in them. And the way I do it is to slot the wheel and insert the teeth, which are made up from strips cut off here, and that'll give you an idea. That's marked out to cut off, and then you round off the end, saw down here and cut these off to make the individual teeth, which is a different method to the one that Harrison used. And finally, boxwood is used fairly extensively. Now boxwood is a very, very nice hard wood that's nice and stable once it's dried out. This is a very big piece of boxwood. You don't normally see it as big as this. It's quite difficult to cut, but it dries in a characteristic way. It has usually one split on the narrowest side from where the centre is to the outside. I've used this for making the old gear, but you can also buy, quite helpfully, blanks that are used for things like making pens, and you can chuck them in one end, chuck them and put the centre in the other end, spin them round and just turn them off on a metal lathe. Very simple, so that you make cylinders of them. So for making up arbours and things like that, that's quite a simple way of getting material together. Doing the lignum vitae is a good deal more difficult, because you have to saw the bowling ball up, and getting the first initial cut when it's round is very difficult to hold it. I had nothing that I could hold it with, and in the end I across the centre line and along the length of the grain, I inserted a few screws, turned it upside down onto the workbench, and then with a saw reached to where the screws were, before then finally splitting the last little bit, and that gave me 2 halves, and I could saw the halves in my motorised saw that I used for metalwork, and that worked really well. That cuts nicely, and you can see it's very, very dense, oily. Can't actually squeeze oil out of it, but it is very, very oily. So you can then make these quite easily, and those can be thinned down to make the rollers which the teeth engage on. So that's a run through most of the clock. Now the more difficult part inside that has to be made is the grasshopper escapement, and I'll just remove the camera and I can show you the grasshopper escapement in here, which is part finished. It's not. It's very difficult to understand how it works without having it outside on the bench. So, and it rests in two V blocks, one on each side. So behind this plate is a V block, and that is made from a glass plate with a V cut in it. I'll just show you the grasshoppers on the two skeleton clocks I've made, so you can see how they work. This is a wooden clock that I made some years ago now, and it's based on a design that was inspired by Robert Sutton, and he was in the peak of his production in about 1800, so it was well after Harrison, in the same general area in Lincolnshire. Now the interesting thing was that he had staggered teeth here that mated with twin wheels, twin rollers. They're very difficult to make accurately and difficult to get to work. This particular clock has got a remontoire so that the spring pressure inside here winds up a weight, which is this weight here, and it's that weight that actually drives the clock on an endless loop, Huygens endless loop principle, and you can see it drops down as the weight lowers, and then there's a clonk as it winds up. But it does work, rather surprisingly. This is made of maple. There it is, winding up again. It's maple plywood that I made myself by gluing sheets of 1.6mm thick veneer together in my workshop. It was very laborious to do. The other interesting thing was that the wheel teeth are made from individual wedges that run out from the centre of the wheel, and you can just see here that they're slightly different colours, a bit like a dartboard. So the individual wedges provide the straight grain where you need it, where the pressure is. On the clock that I'm making now, in fact, the Harrison clock, the teeth are aligned the other way round, so there's no real need to run them right into the middle, and it's a lot less work than doing it like this. That was very labour intensive and difficult to get accurate. The grasshopper is of course straightforward Harrison grasshopper, only it's a half-second one, and almost all Harrison escapements are second. A bit more light on just so that we can see it a bit better. They're difficult things to film, but anyway, this shows that it is possible to get a clock which is made of wood and to run, and that runs nice and accurate. I've got a standard clock on the other side of the room, a long case clock, which is nicely regulated, and it shows it at 14 minutes past, and this is 13 minutes past, so this has lost 1 minute in about 2 days. Now I made a second clock which was converted from Bill Smith grasshopper escapement to the standard escapement that Harrison used. I did it to prove that it would work in half-second, and this took me a long time to get to work properly. The main problem was that the pivots had just a little bit too much friction, but it's running well now. I changed the pivots to PTFE and put some ball races in, and that's definitely cured it. So just to see the action close up. And it's exactly the same except for being 1 second beat to this is 30-second beat that will be in the other clock that I'm making now. And you can see I've got nice springy action on both pallets. This is the stage that I had reached with making the clock before the current lockdown, and I will show how I made the wheels and the roller pinions and other items of the clock over the next few episodes. This is a standard long case clock of slightly later period in oak, which I bought off the internet, and it happened to be the right sort of size to fit the movement. So you can see that the movement just fits inside, which is a characteristic. The movements are very tight on the case. So if I open this up, you can see there's not a lot of spare room. But with the centre hands in that position, that's central about there, and should work reasonably well. I've got a chapter ring for it, and the rest of it will have to have painted decoration as the originals did. So I'll probably give this a bit of a clean and lighten it up because it is very dark. Okay, so that's the project, and I guess it'll probably take me 3 or 4 months, maybe a bit longer. Depends on the lockdown.